I write the High Speed Rodeo newsletter on Substack. And my partner in crime, Tu Lee, with Sino Auto Insights. And he has multiple podcasts, and he also does a newsletter on Substack. And we are here to talk about cars and all things that move. We're going to talk about trade a lot, and we're going to talk about the Munich Auto Show, the IAA, that Tu was able to go to. And look forward to a lively discussion, and want to remind you all that everything we say, or rather nothing that we say about these car companies or their products, nothing is meant to be investment advice. We're just offering take as observers, and hope to provoke some thoughts. Also, if you're watching us, you can ask questions via the chat, and we will try to field some of those, whatever they may be, criticisms, agreement, queries. Please send them our way, and we'll try to have at them in the time that we're on. So, we're definitely going to talk about trade. We're going to talk about the kerfuffle that's underway between Mexico and China over cars. But you know what? Let's start with Munich and what you saw there, because it actually might lead us, especially what the Chinese had to show and what's going on in Europe with the Chinese automakers, might be a good segue into what's now happening in North America. But so talk about Munich. What was going on there? What did the German car companies do? And then what did the Chinese car companies do in that market?
Hey, great. Great to see you again, Joe. And great to be doing this. I actually arrived in Munich last Saturday morning, and a friend picked me up from the airport. The first thing we did was rent electric bicycles, and there's a lake on the Austrian-German border called the Ebse. And so we rode electric bikes up to the lake, and it was it was quite strenuous, to be
Yeah, I was gonna.
honest.
That's a lot.
So
I know a little bit about that area south of Munich. I've done it in a car. Thank you very much.
oh,
Yeah.
and so anyways, because my friend had done it before on pedal bikes, and he was like, it was about impossible. But the electric bikes are great, and perfect day. We could see Austria from the lake, and so then had dinner with old friend Steve Levine, friend of the show, friend of ours, Daniel Kirchert, who's the Byton co-founder, if you recall. He's doing something new with commercial vans, and Afonso Claudio, who does the electric vehicles website. And then the next day we started. It first started off with Volkswagen Group and their press conference. And when we talk Volkswagen Group, we're talking about all their brands. We're talking about Cupra, we're talking about Skoda, we're talking about Volkswagen brand. They had the commercial, meaning they had the robotaxi. So all these leaders were represented on stage, this large booth at IAA, Messe München, it's called. And surprisingly, guess who pulls up and talks for about 10 minutes? Scott Keogh from Scout
Right.
Motors.
Scout brand.
So no plans to enter the European market. So it's a bit surprising. I was sitting next to European journalists, and I think they were taken aback a bit. And because his presentation really focused on reshoring in America, why the Scout Motors brand is the right brand for the United States. So not a lot of connection to what was going on in Europe.
Well, except for
So
this, a sign of life at Volkswagen. Except for this, Scout's a sign of life at Volkswagen, because the news was not that great from a lot of the rest of their operation.
right. And to continue on that theme, they launched 4 vehicles, 3 production vehicles and a concept vehicle off of the MEB platform. So the ID Polo, I think the Skoda is called the Epic, and the Cuda Cupra is called the Haval or Naval. And so these are 2026 year, so 27 model year vehicles, and ton of excitement. We're in Germany, a lot of European, a lot of German press, and one of the biggest booths at IAA. And Bluma came up, and all this fanfare. I'm sitting there pretty impressed, and I'm thinking, yeah, these could be pretty competitive, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, these cars are actually, and let me add that they're all supposed to be targeted below 25,000 euro.
So they're
Euro.
going after the market the Chinese are targeting as well, right?
Yes, and surprisingly, they're all going to be built in Spain. So Cupra led the development of this MEB Plus, and so in the back of my mind, I'm like, these should be competitive if they can launch them on time without a bunch of bugs. And then my next thought was, but these cars are already sold in China, just not under the Volkswagen Group brands. And
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's a little bit of a problem.
so,
Tomorrow's,
um,
yesterday's product tomorrow. Um,
and we have to wonder now, because the China market moves so quickly, will those products a year from now be competitive from a feature set, from a range, from a charging speed, from a amenities, intelligent driving, all these things? And this, as Europe is one of the largest export markets as a region. It's the largest region for exports for Chinese vehicles. So they're going to see more and more of them in 2026, anyways. Now, moving on to Xpeng, also had a huge press conference that talked about robots. It talked about eVTOLs. It talked about their new product, the P7. So they're on a high. They're building momentum. The evening, but let me focus on the Europeans. Stellantis didn't really have a press conference, so the next one I went to was Mercedes. It was
mhm.
in the open space, so it wasn't at the Messe München, and they know how to throw a party because it
Yes,
was
they
it
do.
was really 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 amazing.
This is the
They
This
launched
is
the
the
GLC.
GLC. Yeah.
Yep. So they officially changed the front grill. Now it's a digital grill that'll be on almost every single one of their vehicles. The GLC also has Hyperscreen version 2.0, so a coast to coast screen that I think is close to 30 something inches.
Yeah, I saw pictures
And
of that, and the pictures were pretty impressive. The thing looked like a starship, from an appearance standpoint. And isn't this also the launch for their latest version of the Mercedes-Benz operating system? I mean, the software architecture that they've been developing.
yes, and to your point, I was never a huge fan of the Hyperscreen on the EQS because I thought it was kind of blasé already in the China market. So to double down, I don't know if that's a win for them. If they can execute based on this MBOS, they call it, again, without bugs, launching on time at the right price, at the right cost. And we have to also remember that the GLC for Mercedes is the best-selling car that they
Yeah,
have.
it's core to
So
them.
exactly, and my thought is it's going to be 60-ish thousand euro, same price or around the same price as what BMW had launched, the iX3, and they did that on Friday. So I missed the event because I came on Saturday.
Yeah, this is
But
the iX3 is the first of the Neue Class, the new electric vehicle architecture from BMW. I actually before I left, retired from Reuters, I went to Munich and just 2+ years ago now, and did a piece about their ambitions for the Neue Class, and just they really, I mean, the name is extremely intentional, and that was the name for the car that became sort of the original 3 Series, the car that kind of launched BMW in the global market. 50 years plus from ago. So they really mean for that to be a statement and kind of a new beginning. We'll see, right? I mean, all the caveats that you've mentioned previously about all the other brands, I think, apply to that as well. It's BMW's aspirations are high. They've been reasonably successful, but this thing is going to land in a tough market. And as a friend of mine said, well, at least it's unugly. Some of the, how shall we say it, more forward look, face forward design of recent BMW electrics. They've toned it down a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But tell me a little bit more about the Chinese message, because from afar, the message I heard from the Chinese companies that were at Munich, and apparently they were there in some force, was, as you said, new product, but also lots of talk about big investments in European production capability, research and development, engineering and design capability. Really seems like they're kind of doing a double time march on replicating what the Japanese and the Koreans have done in the same market, is establishing local presence. What was your take on that?
They're trying to hit when the iron is hot, and they see the European market as a real opportunity. If we look at the protectionism all around the world, and we're going to talk about two particular our neighbors to the
Hmm.
north and south. We'll talk about that in a second. But this might be the only true market where there is some protectionism, but not to the point where it's detrimental in a significant way to exports and eventually having a welcome mat laid out because they're going to be building locally.
Well, and it's a
Now,
rich market, right? It's a rich world market. I mean, Southeast Asia and Latin America are important markets for the Chinese, but they're also less rich. These are markets where a lot of consumers can afford to pay a lot of money for a car if they feel like it. So it seems like that's the the uh, the revenue opportunity, if you will, is pretty significant in Europe.
looking at the Europeans to the United States market, it's the same concept. The Europeans make a ton of money in the United States. The Chinese, because of the constant downward pressure on pricing in China, they're looking to Europe to build those margins up and also really, really establish themselves as global players. And I would be remiss to mention that I went to the BYD press conference as well. It was a large, large stage. Stella Lee came on, the head of Europe. I forget her name. She's a woman. As a woman, but I should let you know, Joe, that BYD will be in 32 countries by the end of this year. Sorry, not 32 countries, 32 European countries
Oh,
by the
wow.
end of this year.
Well,
So,
as a typical American, if you forced me, and we're not going to do this, if you forced me to name 32 European countries, it might take me a while. There's some
so
countries in
I,
there I haven't thought about in a long time.
so Joe, I am it's like front row, probably 3 feet, 6 feet from the stage, and it's higher. And so she says that, and I look and I turn to Steve Levine, who's sitting next to me, and I go, "Are there 32 countries in Europe?" Because I'm the American who doesn't understand
Who knows,
geography
right?
in
France,
Europe, right?
Germany.
So,
Yeah, that's it.
oh,
What else you got? Yeah.
but
Italy.
overall, before we move on to something else, let me give you my hot takes. There were 40% more Chinese participants at Munich IAA Mobility 2025 versus 2023. And the opportunity that the Chinese also see outside of the OEMs and the finished goods products is the tier ones and tier twos.
Yeah.
Momenta was there in a big way. There was a lot of announcements on the intelligent driving side. And so if we look at the European tier ones, the Forvias, the Magnastires, they seem analog. They supply components that aren't super high margin, in my opinion. But we look at the Chinese that came, the Horizon Robotics, the Black Sesames, they're gonna supply silicon, which is a high margin thing. And so I think not only does Europe have to worry about the OEMs, but they also need to start really, really paying attention to the tier ones and the opportunities or the IP that they need to start moving towards if they're going to compete against the Chinese.
Absolutely. I mean, I certainly took that away too. That the Chinese are not just they definitely want to export or ultimately build in market, vehicles and sell those vehicles. But they're also built. They're, as you say, they're bringing their supply chains. They're bringing their tech infrastructure, um, and the sort of the worst case scenario is that the Chinese suppliers, Chinese tier ones, tier twos, take away the revenue that companies like Bosch and Forvia and a lot of the European suppliers, or for that matter North American suppliers, have been depending on. If the architecture and operating system is Chinese and built to Chinese spec, the threat to the the companies that are kind of hung up on the Western, the Western architectures and the Western spec seems pretty clear. You mentioned the word protectionism a couple times, and you're right. I think it's a good segue to kind of, meanwhile in North America, all this excitement and, kind of new product, new hope is going on in Europe. Here in North America, it just seems like, the trade war is just getting bigger and broader and potentially more hazardous for the auto industry here.
And it looks like the Trump administration is trying to force people to take sides.
Yeah. So right. So you've alluded to Mexico. I mean, this week, Mexico started, or apparently their legislative process has, begun on potentially imposing 50% tariffs on vehicles made in China, vehicles made in South Korea and India. Although, China kind of fills the windshield on this, but the South Korean and Indian, auto sectors being targeted as well. So there's that going on. Let's just stick with that for a second, because that seems to be something, and I've seen this in a bunch of commentary and reporting on this. One, that seems to be something the Mexican government is doing as they look ahead to next year, when the USMCA, formerly known as NAFTA, is up for renegotiation. And it seems like they're trying to throw President Trump an olive branch by sort of joining. But it seems like there's a lot of risk there, not just to BYD or the other Chinese automakers, but to General Motors. On the High Speed Rodeo, one of the people I lean on for expertise in this area, Warren Brown, he wrote this just yesterday or the day before, that reminding us that the number one importer of Chinese-made vehicles to the Mexican market is General Motors. And yes, there's a 20-plus-year-old decree that's the Mexican government laid down, before any of this, was a glimmer in anybody's eye, saying, well, if you have production plants in Mexico, you can bring in a certain number of vehicles tariff-free. Warren's argument, and one, frankly, I endorse because I put it out on my channel, is, that does not guarantee that GM can continue to bring large and relatively unlimited quantities of Chinese-made Chevys or, into this market. So let's, talk about that. What's your take? Because it seems like this is something that could potentially backfire on the Detroit automakers. Certainly, it's another problem for the Chinese. I mean, what's your take on that?
So let's try to create some context here and hammer home this point that GM ships a lot of Chinese-made cars into Mexico. 71% of all cars that GM sells in Mexico come from China. And Mexico is the 12th largest passenger vehicle market in the world, around 1.5 million units. So it's not insignificant. What's important about Mexico is that it's growing.
Right.
Okay. The per capita income is increasing, and we're seeing productivity increase as well. So not only getting there early will help you and build a foundation for the growing Mexican economy and the Mexican consumer. But it gets complicated because Mexico is now in between, almost like a proxy war between the United States and China. Because as fast as Mexico said, we're looking at increasing tariffs from 20 to 50%, the Chinese were like, you better make sure, or maybe you need to reconsider that. So what I imagine is that DC is filled with Mexican lobbyists and Mexico is filled with Chinese lobbyists right now, talking about cooler heads need to prevail. And the fact of the matter is, Joe, the USMCA has been blown up by the Trump administration. There may never be a NAFTA again, because part two of what we'll talk about in probably the next 5-7 minutes is our neighbor to the north and what they're thinking about. But it's a tough position for the Mexican president to be in, because 3.5 years from now, we could have a completely different direction trade policy wise with our neighbor to the south. And we've relied so heavily on them. Certain companies have, we as in the United States, that it does materially make a difference to companies like GM, Ford to a lesser extent, but
Yeah.
there's about 12 or 13 Chinese EV company or Chinese companies that are selling into Mexico, but that is going to hurt them really, really significantly because Mexico is the number one or two export market for the Chinese brands.
Well, and also I think BYD has talked about. I mean, I think maybe BYD has some production investments in Mexico already, but I certainly have talked about additional production investments. That's, I mean, China no doubt has a number of levers that it can grab to influence Mexican government behavior, but certainly it seems like a pretty direct one would be, look, did you want that investment or not? Right? Gee, gosh, we forgot to make that investment and create a bunch of jobs and a bunch of, a bunch of additional opportunity for your people. Sorry about that. So it just seems like the wargaming going on over this could get fairly intense. And yeah, it just could get fairly intense. And like I said, I
The,
think it's not just BYD that's going to be in the middle of this. It's the legacy car companies and Tesla.
and the irony here, Joe, is that maybe the Koreans don't want to invest in the United States and they'll invest in Mexico instead. So maybe it's a musical chairs going on from a global trade policy standpoint because um a quick aside, I was part of the Automotive News Congress last week, uh, a panel on China towards the end, one or two right before Mary gets on stage,
Mhm.
and Yusun Chung, who's the chairman of Hyundai.
Right.
First of all, it was great that he decided to come and accept the award because of everything that's going on in
Right,
Georgia.
the raid on the factory in Georgia, right.
Now, blame can be liberally given to everyone that's involved. But I don't. Let me just say this: I don't see any American companies getting raided, and I'm certain that there are some American companies that are also in disarray when it comes to some of these visas. That said, Casey Crane uh, asked him. The first question was, what's going on,
Mhm.
and what do you think? And I'm sure that their comms team and Casey had communicated, hey, this is going to be off limits. But, you know, I applaud that they addressed it right away and then they moved on because Yusin Chung's response was, look, I'm really just concerned about everyone involved. We have 300 Korean citizens that are in limbo right now. And the Korean government had chartered a 747 to fly them all back.
Mhm. Right.
And so he said, I'm just concerned about the people involved, and the U.S. government and the Korean government are working together to resolve the issue. So that was
Well,
how he answered it.
yeah, and a diplomatic and smart answer, I think, for him. I mean, huffing and puffing and being outraged probably was going to do him any good. He's obviously smart enough, not to know that. On the other hand, and again, we'll see what happens, right? But it sure isn't hard to imagine, um, you know, the difficulty that managers and executives at Hyundai in Korea are going to have when they start drafting people to go over to Georgia to help build that battery plant. Say, well, we need another 300 people, is because we still need the technical support. The people who understand our processes and our tools and our machinery and all that stuff. They're not going to hire those people in Georgia. Those people don't exist, mostly don't exist in Georgia. And who's going to volunteer for that? It seems like it just creates I mean, a lot of problems for Hyundai, and obviously there's the diplomatic problem created by this. Um, we'll see. I don't imagine Hyundai will, or the South Korean government will say, okay, that's it, we're never going to invest in America again. But Jose Munoz, who's essentially the COO of Hyundai, he was at the same conference, right? And I saw reporting that he said, yeah, we're going to be delayed by 2 or 3 months, which doesn't sound like the end of the world, but I'm sure it's not good. I'm sure it's expensive, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of uh, uh, discussion about what to do and how to avoid this repeating.
For a company now, I'm trying not to take sides here, but for a company that seems to be very dedicated to the U.S. market and hiring Americans, with commitments of multi-billion dollars, you'd have thought there would be a better way to resolve this. Because Jose Munoz did come, and he did have a gaggle, and I think that kind of diffused the situation for Houston to join the
Yeah.
stage. One of the things I will point out, Joe, that I think most people didn't see, he brought his whole family to Detroit, because after the presentation, after the fireside, everybody left to go have lunch. He was on stage taking pictures with his family and his team.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
was a very, very, very proud moment for him. And so that's why I applaud that he did come, because I think you and I know that there are lesser CEOs and heads of large corporations that likely would have punted on being on.
Yeah, they
on
would have said,
stage.
"Gee, gosh, gotta, can't come, urgent business." That's true. Yeah, no,
And
I
one
think
one of
that
the things, let me finish with this. One of the things he did say that pointed directly at what was going on was he only talked about his cars, the company investment, but he did say, look, the US visa process is pretty complicated. And so that to me was like the closest thing he did to poke anything. But outside of that, to your point, and I'd spoken to a few ex-State Department folks, and they know that they all told me there's an easier way to do this, like to make it, to fast track it, as opposed to like changing laws and things like that. we
sure.
we just need to be open to doing that and working with the Korean government to do that. And so, especially when it's for a company that's investing 4, 5, $6 billion into our economy. So
Yeah, no doubt. You'd think that. I mean, and I'm sure I have been, and I don't travel, have not traveled as much as you. I'm sure you have been on planes, going to and from different parts of Asia, and sitting next to someone who's, an engineering, manager, or or a tech, a tech expert from some U.S. car company who's flying into the middle of China or flying to Korea to work on some production issue, or machinery question or whatever, right? So there are U.S. citizens dispatched from U.S. suppliers or U.S. OEMs to other countries to do exactly this kind of work, sort of technical work that is just going to take forever to train some local to know how to do. And when you can send someone over and in 8 hours the problem is solved. I mean, that kind of fluidity seems to be essential, to making this system work. And so, you're right. You'd think that people would figure out, well, we got to make this work somehow, or we're not going to get the investment that we want and the jobs that we want. So, yeah.
well, to
Uh,
hammer that home, Joe, and this is not a Biden administration fault, this is not a Trump administration fault. We outsourced all that stuff, so we don't have the skills. First of all, there's challenges at TSMC in Arizona, Intel in Ohio for skilled labor. How many people in Ohio have worked in a clean room? I mean, these are practical challenges
well,
that these
yeah,
companies that are committing billions of dollars have. And unfortunately, it will take a skilled person, likely from Taiwan, to come here to train them, or at least, set up the capital equipment and make sure it's all working properly before they return to Taiwan. So we have to be, we just have to look ourselves. I don't want to turn this into, a
Yeah, we'll,
lecturing
we'll
series
move to the
thing,
next
but
thing. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned the U.S. I know you mentioned USMCA. I think you also mentioned Canada. So Canada apparently is in the process of reviewing the 100% tariff that I believe they've had on Chinese vehicles, and trying to keep them out. I'm not quite sure what the review. I could.
probably to align with the United States, by the way, just to
Okay,
emphasize that, right?
which would be
Because that 100% tariff, right?
Yeah, which would be, well, except that if you know what alignment with the United States means after these weekend talks in Madrid between the senior Trump administration officials and Chinese officials, if you know what alignment with the United States means, let me know, right? Let us all know right here, because I'm not sure I know what that means anymore.
Well, I meant that they had 100% tariff like the United States did, but
Mhm.
now they're looking at punting,
Yeah,
because
seems like it.
they really are looking to continue foreign direct investment. They're looking to continue trade between China, and if the United States um, continues to be a dicey situation, these countries really do, have to look outward if they can't settle on uh, like adults, a way to move forward. If the business or the trade policy is not good for the United States, or the current administration doesn't believe that, fine, so be it. But we also have to understand as Americans that maybe the deal we want is not is a no is something that they'll walk away from. So
Yeah, no, that's true, and I mean, obviously, it's very hard to predict all this. I've certainly been watching it. I I I do wonder, and again, we'll come back in a couple weeks when I'm back from a road trip and see where we are post September 30. And for a couple reasons. One, and we don't need to go. Let's not go into this all now, but September 30, the electric vehicle credit, the consumer credit evaporates, and I think that will bring a change in kind of the dynamics of the market. But also, that's the end of the third quarter, and I've felt for some time that there's been sort of a let's fake it till we make it kind of approach to what's the impact of all this chaos in trade, chaos and regulation. Let's kind of just fake it for a while and see how things shake out. Well, by the time you get into the fourth quarter and you're sitting there in your boardroom and you're like, okay, what's our budget going to be for 2026? What are we going to spend on marketing and on incentives and production, and how many things are we going to build? And you're starting to see you know, some of these things drop out of the sky already. I mean, all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but Stellantis cancels the electric Ram truck. I mean, that's probably the most expected decision we'll ever see. On the other hand, they made that decision, right? They waited until now. So I expected that the next 3 to 4 months and in the auto industry are going to be a time of tough decisions. As
well, here, to piggyback off that Ram elimination of the electric Ram, Filosa and team are probably looking at bringing Chinese IP into small cars for production in the United States,
yeah,
because
through their alliance with Leap Motor, right? That
yes, and there's even more pressure to do that because Stellantis is struggling. We all know that they're non-existent in outside of Leap Motor. They're non-existent in the China market for the most part. And so the US market, where 30, 35, 40% of their profits come from, has evaporated materially over the last 24 months. And so, and on top of that, GM, Ford, Lucid, Rivian are all promising, Slate are all promising affordable sub $50,000 electric vehicles, or clean energy vehicles at least. So what's one to do? I don't think Tavares or Filosa had any product plans for clean energy small vehicles, and so they're going to have to Frankenstein something together to compete against, if Ford, if GM, if Slate can come out on time with all these products. Because come 26, 27, I think we're going to see, regardless of this tax credit, Joe, we're going to see a lot more clean energy vehicles, and I'm all about that. So
yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think most companies have not, derailed their electric vehicle the electric vehicle projects they put into motion 2 or 3 years ago for launch over the next couple of years, right? I mean, that those trains are on the track, and it's really expensive to derail them. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I do think, and again, maybe we'll take this on one of our next talks. I do think this may be one of those
maybe
things
we'll
where
have
we all,
Filosa come on
yeah, that'd be
the
great.
show. How's that?
Yeah, yeah, and we can talk about the Hemi because they're going to relaunch in the meantime. They're going to relaunch the Hemi.
No. With regards to our friend Simon Wright, without having to pay for credits
Right,
and without having to pay penalties on missing cafe standards.
right,
So that could be
pure
a
profit.
quick way for them to
Oh
get
yeah,
back into the profit machine.
yeah. No,
So
no. Look, I mean, I was kind of making fun of it, but I mean, if I were a shareholder, and I'm not, or and anybody looking at the company, you're absolutely right. Bringing back to Hemi, that's what their customers want. It's what their dealers want. It's a product they absolutely know how to sell, and they've made excellent money And the fact that today's Hemi is, kind of the bastard grandchild of the engine that I have in a 64-year-old Dodge truck that I happen to own is of no concern to anybody. So look,
Oh,
do we have any questions? Because
no, we do not.
no, gosh, we stunned
Uh,
everyone into silence.
well, yeah, that's all right. Um, but um, I the when you bring up the whole Hemi thing, Joe, it reinforces the reason why young people aren't buying cars and probably aren't that attracted to the GMs and the Fords, and they're moving more towards the Hyundais and some of these other companies that build products that aren't trucks, right? Because that is I understand that 80% of all vehicles sold in North America is either an SUV or a truck, or 70%, some ungodly number.
Yeah, it's a big
But
number. It's like that.
but it builds on itself, right? Because they were affordable and everybody has them. So you almost want to have one to play defense on the roads, because if you're in a little Fiat, you're not feeling pretty comfortable when you're sandwiched in between a Tahoe and
No.
an Expedition, especially if you have a kid or two. And so I'm hoping that we get surprised in 2026 and 2027, because battery prices go down, because component prices go down, because we're seeing a bit more uh, economies of scale as more companies transition over to clean energy, especially globally, right? Because we can't
Yeah,
just be
absolutely. I
talking
mean,
about the United
no,
States.
that's right. I mean, the scale is going to happen. The scale it's not gonna, it is happening. I mean, I saw a chart the other day that the Chinese electric vehicle market is now larger than the total US vehicle market. So, if you're waiting for scale, it's kind of has happened in China, which, again, kind of the point you made. I mean, you're going to see these Chinese companies say, wait a minute, we've got all the kinds of scale. If we can export the technology and have, somebody put a top hat on it, we can make that scale even bigger, and the prices will start to go, or the costs rather will start to go down. So yeah, no, I think betting that everything's going to stay the same and, it's Hemi forever is probably going to be a rough bet.
And when do the scales for protectionism are outweighed by the scales of practicality? Because there is economies of scale in China, and in order for us to quickly move towards clean energy, affordable batteries, there needs to be more Ford CATL partnerships, those types of things, right? So you and I aren't politicians, so I don't want to get into that stuff, but it's there. It's not like it's not there. Now, if we develop it ourselves, it's going to be a 3, 5, 7 year thing. And unfortunately, I don't know if Ford and GM, Stellantis have that time frame.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, this seems like an awfully long time from now. Um, well, look, you know what? We've covered a lot of ground in about a half an hour. Like I said, I'm going to be off for a couple of weeks. Who knows what the world's going to look like when I come back? But hopefully, too, you and I can. Well, I'm not. Hopefully, I'm sure we will be talking about it and invite everybody to come back and listen to us when we do. Thank you all.
I am sure we're going to have a lot to talk about when you get back, Joe. So, everyone, thanks for joining us, and we will talk with you all next week or next time.